Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hockey Hub Podcast. So glad you could join us. Adam Pellerin alongside Judd Sirott, episode number 41 of the Hockey Hub. Judd, it's been a while, buddy.
So good to be back. Let's go. How was your Four Nations vacation?
Four Nations vacation was, as Brick would say, stellar. Outstanding. Went up to Vermont with the fam, did some skiing, of course, keeping tabs on the Four Nations tournament, able to watch that. Very exciting, and also keeping tabs on the Bruins as well. I know you were back on the call right out of the gates against the Ducks. 3-2 overtime loss, and then another overtime loss on Tuesday. But before we get to all that, I should ask you how things are with you. Just, how'd you spend your break? How's the family? I see you got a beard now. Last time we were on together, you were starting to grow one, and you told the story about how your mom hated it in college. You shaved it, never to be seen again. Now it's back.
Let's go. Bring it on, baby. I think a lot of people are like, wow, he's a lot older than I thought. Because of all the salt in the salt and pepper beard. No, listen, the break was great. Listen, we are so fortunate to be able to work in this business. This is the toy store of life, getting the opportunity to do this, and certainly it's an unreal privilege being able to do the Bruins. The only hard part about the business is that the hours can get a little bit crazy, and your family essentially inherits the schedule that you have, and because of that, you miss a lot of time with your family and your kids. So having the opportunity, because of the way that the break fell, and it coincided with the kids' February break, which I think was the same with you, getting an opportunity to go with the family, go with my wife and my kids off to Florida and spend a week there in some warm weather was terrific. But I did sneak away for a little skiing up in Vermont before we headed down. So it was great.
Yeah, I know you wouldn't miss that. We were actually skiing on the same mountain a week apart, which is unfortunate because I wanted to do a run with you. I know you're a very advanced skier.
Whoa.
Double black diamonds for Judd Sirott only. And so, it was a great break. Like you said, good to spend time with the family, but excited to get back in the swing of things. I haven't been ringside in a while either. I've missed being with you guys at TD Garden and on the road a little bit, but I'm going to get back into that pretty soon. But it's been good to see Andrew Raycroft and Billy Jaffe involved as well. But let's get to what we want to talk about. First of all, I should say we have a special guest, Craig Button, TSN analyst, who's going to join us a little bit later on in the show, talk about the trade deadline, not only as it pertains to the Bruins and what their plans may be, but also across the league. There are some interesting storylines unfolding as well, so we will get to all that. But first, Judd, let's talk about the Bruins and their most recent loss on Tuesday night to the Toronto Maple Leafs, a game in which they were up 3-0, played one of their best first periods of the season, and they end up losing that lead in the third. They retake the lead, then lose the lead again, and then lose in overtime. So I guess high level, your takeaway from the 5-4 overtime loss.
Well, in the big picture, I think one of the things that we've talked about all season long is how many opportunities that the Bruins have had, not only for wins, but for points, and how many of those opportunities they were unable to secure or points that they squandered. And that was certainly the case against the Toronto Maple Leafs. They played in that first period, Adam. I'd really have to go back and look. But that was among the best 20 minutes of hockey that they played all season long, the way that they started. And the way that they still were able to push the game in the second period. But you could start to see some of the issues when Oliver Wahlstrom took an offensive zone penalty. The Bruins were up 3-1 at that point. The Bruins, as memory serves, they were on the man advantage. It was late in the second period, and it gave the Leafs ultimately a power play to start the third period. And then the goal that Mitch Marner scored certainly gave the team life. You give the Bruins a lot of credit for the resilience that they showed, and David Pastrnak scores a world-class goal to give the Bruins a 4-3 lead. And essentially, listen, you're up by a goal. I know the extra attacker's on with Toronto in the last minute of play, but some of the things, since you talk about the bigger picture, some of the things that allowed the Bruins to have their success early in the game, winning puck races, winning puck battles, snapping pucks tape to tape, making the right decisions, those evaporated at crunch time. You needed an opportunity to clear. Nikita Zadorov along the far side had an opportunity to clear, unable to do so. And then you got Pontus Holmberg, who, yes, He had been scoring a number of goals here of late. He's able to sneak through. You had plenty of guys in the picture with the ability to defend. And that puck goes from Robertson to Holmberg. He's able to tie the game, and Mitch Marner makes a play and wins the game in overtime. But that, I think, is in many ways what's encompassed the Bruins season, and with every point being so valuable. So as we tape this podcast right now, yes, the Bruins have to hop over a couple of different teams in order to secure a wild card spot. But at this point, they're only 2 back of the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Jackets have a game in hand. And just think of those games. So the Bruins have played, almost 60 games to this point? How many of those opportunities for the Bruins to secure that extra point, to nail down that victory, are you starting to think about now?
Oh, absolutely. And you hear in the post-game comments from the players, after the game, whether it be David Pastrnak or Brad Marchand post-game last night, talking about, leaving points on the table. And it's something that they have done, and they've done it in similar ways. To your point, a lot of the same mistakes that we saw in October and November at the beginning of the season, we're still seeing those same things unfold here in February as we get into March. A lot of sloppy play, a lot of untimely, penalties taken by the Bruins in the offensive zone. You mentioned the Wallstrom penalty as well. And it sort of negates that great, really first 40 minutes, especially the first period, but the first 40 minutes, you have a 3-1 lead going into the third period, and you have an opportunity to add on, by the way, at the end of the first period, a great stop, by Samsonov at the end of the Stolarz at the end of the first period.
You have been on break for a while.
I have been. I'm sorry. You know what? Full disclosure. All right. Yes. Samsonov, Ilya Samsonov of the Vegas Golden Knights. That was the last game before the break. We have an animated game coming up on NESN on March 11th against the Florida Panthers. It's going to be a great time. We've been promoting it on our network. If you've been watching the Bruins game, it's the snow day, right? And Andrew Ferentz and I are going to be on the call, right? We'll be animated figures and doing a whole bunch of things. It's going to be a lot of fun. So we did a rehearsal in New York City on Sunday and Monday, and we used the Vegas Golden Knights Bruins game from February 8th. So I just called that game on Monday. So that was fresh in my head, and that's why I slipped with the Samsonov.
By the way, since we're on the Hockey Hub and we have a little bit more time, how did they make you look as an animated figure?
I told them, and this is with all due respect to you, I told them to be generous with the hairline, because that's what I was looking at. I was like, all right, well, that's a little further back than I remember it 20 years ago. So Andrew Ferentz, by the way, great head of hair. So I knew he wasn't going to have any sort of problem. So I said, please be generous with the hairline. That's all I care about, and they were, so that's a good thing. But yeah, my animated Adam, we'll call him, looks good. It's pretty cool. We have the VR headsets on. Andrew Ferentz posted it on social media of him sort of like, yeah, we got the headsets on. But what's cool about it is, you're standing there and, we call the game, there's a monitor, and we have the animated game in the monitor. We also have the real game in another monitor, and so we have that to go on. But when you have the VR headset on, you lift your hands up so it's in your line of sight, and it's your animated hands. It's really strange. And you look to your left, and there's Ferentz right there. I'm like, oh man, this is like, so you're in the animated world. Now the one thing I will say, and I did admit this to my lovely wife Erin. I said, hey, in the animated world, the wedding band it's not there. It's not there. And she said, you talk to them and you get that wedding band on. It was, so animated Adam looks good. The game's going to be a lot of fun. And so I'm really looking forwed to it. We were talking about,
by the way, one quick sidebar before we move on to talk about the Bruins. Since you mentioned, hey, add a little bit more hair. I do have somewhat of an analogous story about that from years ago.
Okay.
But we'll get to that at another time.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, hey, listen, the world is your oyster on this podcast, Judd.
No. You're running the show, baby.
All right. So I was referring to the save that Stolarz made on Morgan Geekie at the end of the first period that would have extended the Bruins' lead at that point. And then at the end of the second period, too, there was an opportunity, shorthanded Brad Marchand, another save by Stolarz. And so you had two opportunities to add on. at the end of periods, and so they weren't able to do that. And again, there are other issues in the game, but I'm just saying that, you were maybe a goal away at the end of one of those periods from maybe coming away with the 2 points.
Anthony Stolarz, especially in that first period, since you mentioned that, he made a number of grade A stops, and the Bruins had generated some terrific chances. And that kept the team at... I understand that the Bruins were able to push the lead to 3-0 at that point, and that's a pretty sizable lead. Then, if you look around the National Hockey League, there aren't many teams in the league that have registered 3-goal comebacks and registered victories. It certainly happened around the league for a number of different teams, but typically, if you're able to get that type of a lead, you're able to secure a victory. But I guess where I'm going with this one, had the Bruins been able to push it to a 4-goal lead, and that's how many great chances that they had early in the game, then I think that might have put the game out of reach. So Anthony Stolarz kept it within range for the Toronto Maple Leafs and allowed them to rally and come back.
Yeah, and just thinking of some of the storylines from the game. One of the storylines going into the game was the sort of new look power play, we'll call it, right? With Morgan Geekie taking David Pasternak's position and Pasternak moving over to the forehand side, produced 2 goals for the Bruins. That was certainly a positive in the game. Freed Pasta up a little bit, and listening to Brick during the broadcast, and then Morgan Geekie obviously scoring his 19th goal of the year. That was I didn't look this up, Judd, but how many times have the Bruins scored multiple power play goals and lost games this year? Maybe more than I'd care to think, but I can't imagine it's been often because of how many times we've talked about special teams being a huge factor.
No, and just to go back, since you mentioned special teams, remember in that first period, the Bruins were shorthanded twice, if memory serves, and they were able to kill those off effectively. But to your point, the power play certainly looked even better. And the power play has been better overall since January 1st. But I think that the change that was made, and it was a good one by the coaching staff, and part of it was fueled by the fact that, listen, Morgan Geekie with another goal last night, I believe he has 10 goals in his last 15 games. And we can talk about him a little bit more if you'd like. But it creates a completely different look. And I think it caught Toronto off guard because you never see David Pasternak in that spot on his strong side in the right circle. And a credit to the Bruins, not only did they enter well, they recovered pucks well, they passed pucks well, and they funneled pucks to the middle. That was one of the things that Brick had talked about during last night's game, and they were able to cash in. And the power play overall since January 1st is trending toward 20%. Now, I understand that would still put them in the middle of the league, but it's far better than what we saw in the first half of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mason Lohrei in that first period, another positive for the Bruins. Again, I know we're talking about a 5-4 overtime loss in which, the Maple Leafs came down 3-0, but just some storylines that are, sort of popping to the forefront. Mason Lohrei, that was probably the best period of hockey I've seen him play as a pro. It was outstanding. The pass, obviously Pavel Zacha starting the breakout, and then Lohrei hitting Pasternak 29 seconds into the game. Outstanding. Had some other opportunities as well. He was. That is, if you're a Bruins fan and you're looking ahead to the future and you're thinking about what this team may look like down the road, that was a good. That was a very positive display by Mason Lohrei to make you feel good about what may be to come in the years and seasons.
I think with young players, the issue is for a lot of teams, and it's not just Mason Lohrei, but from game to game, the consistency isn't always there. And I think the other thing is sometimes with young players, period to period, the consistency isn't always there. Yeah. He was fabulous in that opening 20 minutes. But I think the question for all young players is, can you sustain it? He's playing a lot more minutes. He's playing in different situations. And it certainly wasn't perfect last night, but you do have to be encouraged a lot by what you saw. And I think the other thing that comes to mind is something that the interim head coach Joe Sacco had mentioned the other day. He had some rough moments against the Anaheim Ducks in that first game coming off the Four Nations break.
Sure.
He had 2 assists, but he was also on for a couple of goals against, and there were some quizzical decisions that if the coaching staff comes to him and they try and correct a few things, or if he makes a mistake, he doesn't necessarily get sidetracked. I think there are a lot of guys, especially young players, when that happens and the coach gets in your ear or another player gets in your ear, sometimes you look at body language, you look at what those next few shifts are like. And for the most part, he's able to shake that off and still continue to play. And that's a good trait to have. But he has a long way to go. I think the other thing that we have to remember, this is his first full season in the National Hockey League, and he is 23 years old. And let's add one more thing. He's still learning the position. This is not the position that he grew up playing.
Right. He was a forward and converted to defense, later on. And we see the offensive ability is there, no question about that. And, again, I mentioned I was in New York and I was chatting with Andrew Ferentz, and, he's a big fan of Mason Lohrei, and, talking to him, and this is not something that we haven't heard before, but in terms of the maturation of defensemen in the National Hockey League and reaching the point of, all right, you're there, that takes a while, 6-7 years typically for defensemen. And so Mason Lohrei, as you mentioned, just in year one, first full season for the Bruins. And another thing that I thought of when you were talking about Lohrei in terms of, his ability to be coached. I remember Jim Montgomery saying this during the playoffs, like last year, that he was a sponge. That he loved coaching him because he just absorbed everything that was being said to him. And again, ups and downs, right? In the overtime period, right? We see that, is, again, and not to put any blame on him, but that's, he was involved. He was on the ice. And so anyway, Mason Lohrei's game, especially to start, very good. Let's talk about David Pastrnak. And I just keep thinking about where the Bruins would be without him on the ice during this season that's been a roller coaster ride. A 3-point night, a couple of goals. He's got 799 career points. Just an all-world player. Outstanding. That goal, in the third period was just, it's special. He is a special player.
Well, let's go back to January 1st, and I think you can easily make the argument he's been the best hockey player on the planet since the start of January. He comes into the action as we tape this right now, 6th in the league in points, 6th in the league in goals. He's been fabulous. Listen, he is always worth the price of admission, but I think last night you got more than your money's worth by the way that he played last night against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And against some of the big-time teams in particular, it really brings the best out in him.
Yeah. 8th 30-goal season for David Pastrnak, tying him for the most in Bruins history with Rick Middleton and Phil Esposito. And usually one or two of those guys is in the conversation when you're talking about goal scoring in Bruins history. Some bad news for the Bruins potentially. Not only for their current roster, but I don't know what the trade deadline plans are, but Trent Frederick's name has certainly come up in some reports because he's an unrestricted free agent and somebody who might be on the trading block. Again, don't know how that's going to play out, but injured in the game against the Maple Leafs in the second period with less than 4 minutes to go, I believe, in the period. Jake McCabe delivering a hit. Trent Frederick did not return. So we're still waiting to hear what's going on there, Judd.
No, hopefully he's okay. And just to kind of go back, one of the things that the general manager, Don Sweeney, had mentioned on Sunday when he addressed the media is that, listen, things can change with one phone call. But it certainly sounded like of the guys who are on the roster who are unrestricted free agents, I think the only player that it sounded like Sweeney had a chance of moving forward with was the captain, Brad Marchand. We can talk a little bit further about that.
Yeah.
So, that includes Trent Frederick. He's going to be unrestricted at season's end. Hopefully he's okay. It was not clear to me exactly what happened. I think when I first saw it, it looked like he took a high hit from Jake McCabe, but then somebody else had mentioned to me, I think it was a lower body injury. So again, I have no idea, and I try not to speculate on injuries and why he left the game. But if you're the Bruins, or for a team that's interested in a guy like Trent Frederic, who has playoff experience, he's versatile, he's tough, he's got some good hands. This is a valuable piece that could be available at the deadline, and I'm sure a lot of general managers around the league and a lot of personnel guys around the league, when they saw that happen, I'm sure they were on the phone.
Yeah, no question. And just to put a bow on this Maple Leafs Bruins segment, Chris Tanev hurt for the Maple Leafs. That's something that Toronto fans are going to be hoping and praying is not too serious, because he left the game, did not return. He's been a big part of what they've been able to do defensively under Craig Berube in his first year as Maple Leafs head coach. A 5-4 overtime loss for the Bruins in their final meeting against the Maple Leafs this year. Here's what interim head coach Joe Sacco had to say to Andy Brickley after the game.
Joe, you had to be pleased to a certain degree with your team effort tonight. I want to start with the first 40 minutes when you built the 3-1 lead. What did you appreciate about your team's game to that point in a hockey game?
That we were ready to play tonight. I mean, that was the biggest thing that we talked about coming off the last game. Spotting a 2-goal lead, playing catch-up hockey is tough. And tonight we did the opposite. We were ready to play. I thought that we were really engaged in the game, and it's unfortunate that, obviously that we don't get that extra point.
Yeah, and there were 2 of those 3 goals in that 3-1 lead that were on the power play. Some tweaks to that first unit. What's the thought process with Lorei left shot at the top of the umbrella? It seems like Pastrnak gets a lot more touches when he's on his forehand side.
Yeah, it's just, it's something that we're trying to make adjustments. We know that the power play has had some issues at times this year, so it frees up David a little bit more. Teams are starting to take him away in certain areas of the ice, so it gives him a little bit more freedom on the other side. And I thought it looked better tonight.
Talk to me about the start of the third period. It almost seemed, I know they scored a power play goal, it was a nice goal by Marner, but it seemed like the beginning, the first 5 or 6 minutes of the third period, there was some apprehension in the club. What was your take?
No, I don't think so. I just think, we know we have 1 minute to go on that kill to start the third, and it's a big one, right? You want to make sure that you get the job done, and they were able to squeak one out there in the last 6 seconds, and they gained some momentum off of that. There's no question about it. This is a good offensive team that we played, and they were able to recapture some momentum there. And but we wanted to stay on our toes. We wanted to keep playing. Obviously, they get the tying goal there, but then Pasta makes a big play. It's just, that empty net goal was too bad.
Did you feel like there were plays to be made to secure the puck in the last minute plus to win this game in regulation?
I think so, but I'm not going to really go into details about that. But, yeah, I think there was.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay.
All right, so that was Andy Brickley's conversation with Joe Sacco after the Bruins' 5-4 loss in overtime. Obviously, the 6-on-5, which has been an issue. Late period goals have been an issue for the Bruins this year, and it came back to bite them, unfortunately, once again at TD Garden. Bruins wrap up their season series against the Maple Leafs, 1-2-1 against Toronto this year. Stream the entire Sox season with a NESN 360 annual plan available at an all-new reduced price of just $20 a month paid annually. And for a limited time, get 4 free tickets to Fenway with your purchase. Visit NESN360.com to sign up today. Adam Pellerin and Judd Sirott here with you on the Hockey Hub podcast, episode number 41. It is our last podcast in the month of February, and we are 8 days away from the NHL trade deadline. A lot of uncertainty swirling around the Bruins, really across the league as well, but in terms of the Bruins' plans and what the team might look like after the deadline, well, that remains to be seen. Don Sweeney, general manager of the team, was on the Bruins pregame show here on NESN, Bruins Face Off Live. He talked to Dale, Billy, and Barry about the state of the team and the Bruins' mindset going into the trade deadline.
We're still in the hunt, and we'd like to stay there. I don't think we've done a good enough job throughout the year to put ourselves in the unique position that we've been, most of the previous years here. So we've got a lot of work to do. And obviously we've got a couple injuries, but all teams face injuries. So you got to battle through that. It's a great opportunity for other players to step up in ice time that they might not have been accustomed to, and we'll see what the results are going to be. But Cam talked about this a while back. We're playing both sides of the street right now, and I have to do my due diligence as to what moves we can make with an eye towards right now, but an eye towards the future.
As you watch your team, Donnie, as you think about your team and the makeup and everything, is there one thing that's more pressing that you want to address than anything, or whether it's now or over the summer, anything that is most pressing to you for this team?
Well, I think when Joe took over, we went on a really good run, and defensively we were tight. And then, we sprung some leaks after about 20 games, and we have not got it back to the level of checking that we would like to. And that's not just defending. I talk about checking, being able to skate, and being able to put pressure on the other team, create turnovers, and be able to go on offense from there. And our power play has struggled this year. And really, specialty teams in general, which has been typically very, very strong suit of ours. So it's some areas that we need to address. And we've had a lot of turnover in years. Obviously, when you're rolling out Patrice for 18 odd years, that's an automatic, right? So, who's taking those minutes, and we've had some players that we're learning about what they're capable of doing, but they were a bit of an unknown, and it's a work in progress. But we've got some areas, we haven't scored to the rate that we would like to. Several players that had really good years last year are below the watermark of what we expected, and that happens. Periodically, you go through times where the puck doesn't go in. Right? Even for guys that scored as many as he did, sometimes they didn't go in. So ultimately, we'd like to address some of those areas, and hopefully these next 6 games we'll keep our heads in it and be battling for a playoff spot.
You might listen to that if you're a Bruins fan and say, well, Patrice Bergeron wasn't on the team last year. But listening to Don Sweeney say, hey, he was here for 18 years. He was a steadying force in the Bruins lineup for 18 years. You could rely on him for so many things, such a special player. And then he talked about how a lot of guys had career years last year and they're not having the same year as they had the prior season. And you don't have a Patrice Bergeron to sort of offset that anymore, right? Listening to that sort of dawned on me and said, yeah, this is a ripple effect. That could have an impact on the Bruins this season and beyond unless they address it, in another way. I know they did, this past offseason with Elias Lindholm, but it's just not he's not having the season that they expected to have at this point in terms of production. So, it's had an impact. It really has.
I think there's a lot to unpack, certainly
Sure.
from Don Sweeney's comments. I know you played Joe Sacco's comments a little bit earlier. But I think he was fairly honest in his assessment of why the Bruins are where they're at. And I think for me, in the big picture, they just haven't been able to defend consistently all season long. And the run that he talked about right after the coaching change was made, then the Bruins started to be stingier. It's not necessarily that the goal production went up by quite a bit or the power play started to kick it in. They checked a lot better. And then really after the Christmas break, they haven't been able to sustain that. I know we talked about the fact that we've been a little bit porous and maybe we've chased some offense, and that's part of the issue. But the Bruins overall, if as we tape here today, they are 24th in the league defensively for a team whose identity was supposed to be an elite defensive team. But I think the other thing in particular, since you mentioned Patrice Bergeron and the impact, I think you actually started to feel it probably in the second half of last year. Mm-hmm. That if you look at some of the underlying numbers for the Bruins beginning in the second half of last year to what we've seen through to this point in almost 60 games, the type of chances that they're allowing, what the power play's been like, what the overall goal production has been like, and you haven't had career seasons from guys like Sacco and Charlie Coyle and Trent Frederick and Morgan Geekie. Well, Morgan Geekie has definitely produced, so maybe leave him out of the conversation. Sure. But I think defensively, you still have had those issues that stem all the way back to last season. I think the principal difference is that you had two really good goaltenders, and also the chances that you're giving up are different. Mm-hmm. And this is not a slight to Jonas Korpisalo, but the goaltending that the Bruins got last year, they were third in the league in save percentage. They were fifth in the league in goals against per game. Those goaltenders, Jeremy Swayman and Linus Ullmark, they were dialed in. And I think in many ways, they papered over some of the mistakes that you saw from the Bruins in the second half of the season because of the way that they played. The other thing that Donnie mentioned, when you talk about how the team defends, and I think it's really important to note that it's not just the way you're playing in your own zone, but how you're playing up ice. I think one of the things that the general manager wanted to do with the team, and this is stuff that you and I had a chance to cover early in the season. They wanted to create more of a forecheck. They wanted to create more anxiety for the other team when they were trying to break pucks out. And the Bruins, look at the first period and the way that the Bruins played against the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's what the Bruins were designed to do. That's what they wanted the Bruins to do. They didn't spend a whole lot of time in their own zone. Yeah, Jeremy Swayman had to face a couple of chances. But the Bruins as a group have not necessarily been able to play like that consistently, period to period, game to game. But that's the way they were designed, and that's some of the checking that he's referring to.
Yeah, and again, how much time did we talk about it going into the season, how much size the Bruins added and how big they were. They were the biggest team in the league, and they were going to address some of these issues, and they were going to be able to match up against the Panthers in the postseason, right? And that was the plan, and unfortunately, that plan has not worked out to this point. So, Judd, good to reunite with you, my friend. It was a good discussion, and look forward to having more.
When are we going to do an
Hub?
Animated Hockey Hub?
Well, we'll have to,
like just stick figures?
It's above my pay grade, but I think it's a great idea.
Come on, run it up the flagpole. You're big in the business. You've been here forever.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair enough. All right, I will run it up the flagpole as we segue to our very special guest. And joining us now is TSN hockey analyst Craig Button. Craig, thanks for joining us on the Hockey Hub.
Yeah, my pleasure to join you, Adam. I mean, hockey is such a bedrock in the Boston, New England area. So it's always a pleasure to participate with such passionate fans and such a great history of hockey.
Yeah, and those fans are wondering what's going to happen with this Bruins team at the trade deadline. A lot of anxiety, uncertainty among fans here in Boston. Certainly don't know which path they were going to take a month ago, but it seems like it's coming into focus now with the team currently on the outside looking in the playoff picture, only 2 points back as we record this, but still, Don Sweeney the other day addressing the media said the team was going to take a cautious approach and sort of compared it to years past where the team was maybe in first place or high in the standings where they would be a little bit more aggressive. I'll ask you, what does a cautious approach mean to you in this context?
Well, so cautious to me means you got to recognize where you are with respect to what your team has shown you. Let's not forget that in 8-9 years ago, the Bruins missed the playoffs in 2 consecutive years. And, that was coming off of a lot of success. And then they retooled it, and we know how good they've been in the period since, including losing that Game 7 to St. Louis in 2019. But they've been a top team. I believe managers have to look at the team as it is, not as they hoped that it would be or as they thought it would be, but as it is. Hampus Lindholm, who's a solid defenseman, reports are not back for the year. We do not know what the situation is going to be with Charlie McAvoy. So right away, you're looking at 2 defenders that are instrumental to any team's success to be able to move forward. And Don Sweeney knows what the report is on Charlie McAvoy, but as you're trying to make up ground, you don't have them. So you understand that we have some injuries that are really, really hampering our team. And now you start to see where you're at with respect to what your team is. Hard time scoring. We look at the defensive play, which has been really good at times and really off at times. And then we think about the game Tuesday night. I mean, there had to be all kinds of joy in Boston. They're up 3-0. They're playing well. Toronto storms back to make it 3-3, and then boom, just like that, it's 4-3. And then you lose a point by losing in overtime. I think the Bruins have shown exactly what they are. I don't think they're a contender. I think they have some flaws. They have some injuries that are going to really hamper them. So I think that Don Sweeney has to look at the team with respect to what are we going to do to try to position ourselves to not be in this spot next year. They don't have a lot of high-end talent, a lot of high-end skill. That's where their offensive struggles come in. So how do you try to look to improve that? It's not just at the trade deadline. It's also leading into free agency, and we know that the cap is going up. There's certainly for the 3 years beyond this year. So I think it's always been about Boston being a contender. Don Sweeney has the experience of having gone through this previously. I think he's in the exact same spot.
And you sort of wonder how aggressive the Bruins will be at the trade deadline in terms of a possible sell. And the name that's come up that's raised some eyebrows, of course, is the captain, Brad Marchand. He's an unrestricted free agent at year's end. What's the likelihood that the Bruins deal their captain?
Listen, I just can't picture Brad Marchand wearing anything other than 63 in the black and gold. I can't get it in my head. I close my eyes, it still comes up black and gold 63. And when we think about the Boston Bruins, to me, Brad Marchand embodies everything that the Boston Bruins have been and stood for decades. And certainly, I can't see that now. When you look at what Brad Marchand is as a player and what a difference maker he is and still is, there's no doubt that there's teams that would be fully interested in adding Brad Marchand to their team. And even Brad the other day talked about, playing meaningful games. And he doesn't want to be part of a rebuilding team. He says, you're just kind of playing a game and you don't have anything to play for. And he says, whether that's trying to play for the playoffs or play for a Stanley Cup or whatnot, meaningful has different, connotes different things depending on where you're at. No question that Brad Marchand would garner tons of interest from the contending teams. And at the same time, is this a path that Don Sweeney wants to go along? I think what Don Sweeney has to be able to do is evaluate, okay, I've talked to you, Brad. How do you feel about the potential of moving and playing somewhere else? He says, I don't want to play anywhere but Boston. You have to factor that in. And then Don has to look and go, what are the offers I'm getting? Is it just an offer to get something for Brad Marchand that's not going to really help us? And do I run the risk of hurting a relationship that's been so strong? And these are the things that happen behind the scenes, but I think those are the important areas that you have to investigate and have the discussion. You just have to have the discussion with Brad and go from there. And it may come down to Don Sweeney goes, Brad, we got ourselves in a spot where we're being offered something that's going to really move our team forward, that's really significant, and we really have to look at doing it. And at the same time, Brad goes, okay, well, that's a good team. Okay, I'll try it, and we'll talk in the summer if we want to resign here. Those are real conversations that are necessary in this situation.
What do you think the possible return could be? What would Don Sweeney do if somebody said, "Hey, here's a first-round draft pick for Brad Marchand"? Is that enough? What would be a good return for the captain in your estimation?
So there's different levels of first-round draft pick. There's top 5, there's top 10, there's top half. I have to believe that Brad Marchand is not going to any team that isn't a contender if that's a path he wants to go down. So now that becomes a late first-round draft pick.
Right.
That's really a second-round draft pick. Does that really help you? I mean, we know that having more picks are better than having less picks. But at the same time, excuse me, you have to be very careful with just trying to go, oh, we got a first-round draft pick. Well, if it's 29th pick, that's just not something that's going to be part of your franchise here, at least for the next 3 or 4 years.
And in terms of some of the other players that have been mentioned, Craig, and take your time to clear your throat, by the way. That's fine. We got plenty of time here on the Hockey Up Podcast.
No, I'm good.
In terms of some of the other players, right? You had some unrestricted free agents, some restricted free agents. Morgan Geekie is playing very well. He's an RFA. Trent Frederick, is an unrestricted free agent, although he just took a hit from Jake McCabe on Tuesday night. So there's an injury situation there. You have Charlie Coyle, another year left on his deal after this year. Brandon Carlo still has a couple of more, but his name's been bandied about. What names do you look at on this Bruins roster and say, all right, that's a prime candidate to get dealt at the deadline?
Well, I think that the unrestricted free agents, the 3 that you mentioned, I don't think the 2 that you mentioned, certainly Frederick and Geekie, they're going to garner a lot of interest from outside Boston, and teams should be interested. I mean, Trent is A healthy Trent is a hard, heavy player. The playoffs are hard, heavy hockey. That type of player is somebody that teams want to add. You want to be bigger and heavier and harder to play against. Morgan Geekie has that size. He has some scoring ability. He's not going to go in and play on your top line, but you add him as more scoring depth. There's teams that need a little bit more scoring and would benefit from that. So Morgan and Trent, I think, are going to be very highly coveted players. Charlie Coyle and Brandon Carlo are kind of a little bit different. A lot of seeds for trades that happen leading into free agency are planted here at the trade deadline. Somebody phones Don Sweeney and goes, would you be interested in trading Brandon Carlo? And Don goes, geez, I'd never really wanted to think about trading Brandon Carlo. And certainly with the uncertainty of Charlie McAvoy and knowing Hampus Lindholm isn't coming back, you don't want to leave your blue line totally empty and throw the young guys to the wolves, so to speak. So, but if you're a team, Brandon Carlo has a great contract. He's a really good second pair defenseman. And teams that are trying to improve their blue line, not just for now, but into the future, are going to be very interested in Brandon Carlo. But that trade may not happen until the free agency period is looming. So when you consider that type of player, there's no question that Don Sweeney will field some calls on that. I don't see it happening, but seeds can be kind of planted. And the same thing with Charlie Coyle. Charlie Coyle is what I call a flex player. He can play on the wing. He can play in the middle. He can play in your third line. He can bump up. He can provide some scoring. Again, with 1 year left on his contract and the certainty with the salary cap going forward for 3 years beyond this year, I think that gives teams a lot of confidence to say, well, we can absorb that contract, or we can add that player. And what are you willing to give? And there's going to be some teams, and it's different for Brad than it would be for Charlie Coyle, but a team that's saying, hey, listen, we need to make the playoffs. We want to be in a playoff spot. I'll give you an example. The Utah Hockey Club, they win against Chicago. They beat Vancouver. They put themselves back in a pretty significant fight for the playoffs. Would they be interested in a Charlie Coyle? Would the Toronto Maple Leafs be interested in a Charlie Coyle? They're looking for a right-hand centerman. And, they're trying to push ahead in the playoffs. I don't know if Boston wants to trade with Toronto, but those are two different scenarios where there would be absolute interest in Charlie Coyle. And I think both those teams would be very happy to add that contract for the next year.
Let's look at some storylines across the league. And, the hockey world was stunned back in January, late January, with Mikko Rantanen going to the Carolina Hurricanes, a blockbuster trade. But the two sides have yet to figure out a contract. And so he remains unsigned beyond the rest of this year. Is it possible the Hurricanes could actually move him before the deadline?
I think it's possible. They paid a pretty significant price to acquire Mikko Rantanen, with the idea that Mikko Rantanen was going to help them go deeper into the playoffs, because that's the goal for the Carolina Hurricanes. They've been a good regular season team, but trying to get over that playoff hump and get deeper into the playoffs is where they're headed. I don't think there's any question that Mikko Rantanen is a player that can help you do that and certainly adds all the elements you're looking for. But you look at what happened last year with Jake Gensel, and that's fresh in the minds of the Carolina Hurricanes management and ownership, and they're going, well, geez, it didn't work out for us. We gave up a lot. Maybe we can go back and recoup some of what it cost us to get Rantanen, and because we don't want to just again give up what we gave up and then lose him for nothing. I get that argument. I'm a big believer is you made a bold move, and the move was one that I think was strong. Don't start layering it with what happened with Gensel. Start looking and going, we're trying to focus in on right here, right now, and do we believe that Mikko Rantanen can help us do that? Because if you look at it and go, well, you know what, we want to get something back for him, and we can't sign him long term, then why did you do it in the first place?
That's a good question. And I'm sure a lot of Hurricanes fans are asking that question as well, Craig. Another, name that's being shopped around, and it's actually a team that's going to come to Boston on Thursday night, is Brock Nelson, the New York Islanders. What teams would be interested in him?
Yeah, well, War Road, Minnesota. I joke about this, Adam. War Road, Minnesota. I call it a suburb of Winnipeg, Manitoba. It's just across the border. War Road. I don't know if you know this. War Road used to play for the Canadian Senior Hockey Championship, and in their arena, it's a great arena. A lot of great history with the Christian brothers and Dave Christian, who happens to be Brock Nelson's uncle,
Yeah.
played in Winnipeg. So and Brock knows that. I think that Brock Nelson would be an absolute perfect fit for the Winnipeg Jets as a second line center. You have, Scheifele, who's a great player, number one. Then you have Adam Lowry, your number three. He just slides in there. He's got the back end of Lowry and the front end with Scheifele. I can't think of a better scenario for the Winnipeg Jets than being able to get a Brock Nelson in there. Big, strong, heavy player, scores in tight, scores on the power play, leans on you, and he takes some of the pressure off of the top line. I think they need some size in their second line, and I think that Brock Nelson would be able to add that. And Winnipeg Jets have been a fantastic story, and I think that we know what's happened in last year's playoffs. This is a good team, but I think it needs some reinforcements, especially on the second line. And I think Brock Nelson would fit perfectly.
Just a couple more things to get to. The Penguins and their situation on the outside looking into the playoff picture right now. Kyle Dubas, according to The Athletic, citing a source, said that he would trade Erik Karlsson in a heartbeat. And you look at what's remaining on the contract, you might understand why that's the case. Is that a possibility?
I think it is. When we watched Erik Karlsson play in the Four Nations tournament, I think he was. I call it vintage EK65. I mean, he was brilliant for Sweden, and some players, I'll go back and reference Brad Marchand. They're wired to compete. They're wired to play in games that matter, and then you put them in a situation where, and the players. I always say this, Adam. The players always know, and they always know first. The players in Pittsburgh know that they don't have a chance to make the playoffs. They're going to play hard because they're competitors, but they know. And so you watch Erik Karlsson, maybe not be as invested, and people go, "Well, that's not the type of player you want." No, when you put Erik Karlsson, just like it is the case with the vast majority of players in a good environment, they get to a spot where they're more inspired, and then all the best of their play can come out. We saw that in the Four Nations. Pittsburgh would have to retain salary on Erik Karlsson to trade him, but we're talking about a difference maker when Erik is on his game. And if you want to just look at a small sample size of the Four Nations and see what he can do, and actually, Erik's really played well from what I would call first 25 games struggles where he was really poor. I think he's played very well since then. And certainly, if you can get a team, if you can get Pittsburgh in this case to be able to take on a big portion of the salary, retain it remaining. I think Pittsburgh's on the hook for 10 because San Jose's still on the hook for 1.5 million. So you get them to take of that. And I'm going to go back to the certainty of the salary cap. 3 years going forward, you know what it is. So you can say, hey, listen, Pittsburgh, you pick up 3-4 million of that. We got a player at 6-7 million that can be a difference maker. I think there's every reason to believe that Erik Karlsson could be moved. But Pittsburgh's going to have to do their part in terms of retaining salary.
And finally, just some of the other storylines that we covered a number of them, of course, Craig, but is there anything else that you're looking at, any in particular teams or players that could be moved before the deadline?
Yeah, we talked about Rantanen a little bit.
Right.
The Colorado Avalanche are a team that I'm really trying to gauge where they're headed because they made the moves for the two goaltenders. They felt that their goaltending wasn't good enough. They made the big trade for Rantanen. Last year, they traded Byram for Middlestat. I don't think that's a team that's at the top end of the contenders in the West. And certainly they want to be in that market. I don't think they're finished. They're a team I'm really watching closely to see what they can do because they make a significant move again. I think they can lift their team into a better contending spot. The other place I'm looking at is the Florida Panthers. I don't know what the situation is with Matthew Tkachuk. I mean, obviously, he wasn't able to fully participate in the last two games with Team USA at the Four Nations. They have some free agents. I don't know what's going to happen with Sam Bennett, Aaron Ekblad. If Matthew Tkachuk is out for the year, is this a team that says, hey, listen, we're not going to be able to do what we want to do in terms of competing for the Cup? Do they look to make some moves? And I'm talking about being sellers. And again, you start to look at what your chances are without a Matthew Tkachuk. I'm not going to say they're greatly diminished, but they're diminished. And I think that the LA Kings trying to add some offense, that would be the trio of teams I'm really paying close attention to.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Florida Panthers, a lot of miles logged over the last couple of years, right? Reaching the Stanley Cup final back-to-back years, and then without Matthew Tkachuk, you're really up against it. How much fun is this time of year, man? Isn't it so much fun? I love it.
Well, it's fun because teams, like you've watched teams and you've seen what they are, and in some cases what they aren't. Now those teams are trying to figure out what they can do to strengthen their team. They're also trying to figure out what they can do to make sure, in the case, and I will use the Boston Bruins, to make sure they're not in this spot next year. They want to be in a better place at this time next year. So all the things that lead into the trade deadline, what does it mean coming out of the deadline in terms of play, Stanley Cup playoffs? And free agency, I think, is going to be wild this year because we see the cap going up. We know it's up for a number of years. And I think that we're not just going to see like players signing as UFAs. We're going to see some significant movement with restricted free agents and some roster changes, which we didn't see during the last 4 years because of what I call the COVID CBA. Caps were maxed out. There was no room there. Now I think it's opened up. The ice jam is broken. Hey, we're in spring. Isn't that what's supposed to happen?
That's right. And spring training is underway for the Red Sox here in Boston, and the trade deadline is fast approaching, just over a week away. Craig Button of TSN joining us. We appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure, Adam. Just a great conversation. Thanks for having me.
And that'll wrap things up for the Hockey Hub. Once again, thanks to Judd Sirott for joining us. We will see you next time.